the temple was destroyed, the Ark of the Covenant was stolen, and according to Jewish tradition, it's still in existence, and when the temple is rebuilt, will reappear. If you follow it, in the Ethiopian royalty claim to have it today.
Is that right?
There's this, yes, there's actually a church that housed by the Ethiopian royalty that they claim houses the Ark of the Covenant.
Wow.
But that would be the original Ten Commandment stones made by Moses, given by God, in the special container prescribed in the laws of Moses, how to be built. I think it's gold.
That would be the Ark.
The Ark of the Covenant.
Yeah.
Some of these artifacts have recently been reconstructed. If you follow this up to the modern area, the schools, the Essenes, the Pharisees, and the Sadducees are Second Temple schools. They would have been prominent in the time of the Roman control of Israel.
Yeah.
So at that time the king of Israel was actually a Roman puppet.
Yeah.
He wasn't even Jewish according to Jewish law. He came from Jordan. People have heard of Petra, the famous carvings in the mountains of Jordan. They're seeing the Indiana Jones movie.
Right.
That's where the king Herod came from. He came from that dynasty, but he was like a Roman puppet king of Israel. And the different schools, you had the Essenes, the Pharisees, and the Sadducees, which are mentioned in the New Testament. And the Pharisees would have been the people who held straight by the laws of Moses, that held that it's incumbent upon Jews to follow exactly the laws of Moses as they were prescribed. The Sadducees were more aristocratic. There's a debate whether they were priests from the priestly class, descendant of King Sadok, who would have been the high priest Sadok, whose family controlled the high priest position in the temple for hundreds of years, and whether the Sadducees were his descendants, or it was just an aristocratic school of Jews that came into power and ran the temple, even though they didn't really care about doing it properly. If you follow the Talmud, there's constant debates. So you see, the Pharisees were the preservers of the tradition, but they didn't actually control the temple. Very shortly after the temple is rebuilt in Ezra, the Greeks come over and take over, and then you have the Hanukkah story. After Hanukkah, a few generations, within the next generation, the leaders of Israel became evil, power corrupted them, and the priests took over the kingship, and they had the sages slaughtered, and
wow.
And all this history is brought down in the Talmud.
Wow.
Yeah.
So now though we have even it's quite a complex differentiation between the Reform, the Liberal, the Orthodox, right?
Can you explain that?
Well, that's coming from European culture. I mean, it's prophesied in both the Hebrew prophets and the New Testament, the return of the Jews to Israel.
Yep.
So you take, there was the Roman expulsion. Rome made it punishable by death to be openly a Jew in Israel. If you see the great architecture in Israel, most of that's Roman built. The Roman, they rebuilt the temple, and big Roman architecture. That's mostly what survives today. So from that expulsion, originally most Jews were in Arab countries, and when the Arab with Muhammad came over into Europe and through Spain about 1,000 years ago, to where before the war you had as many as 15 million Jews in Israel,
Yeah.
all coming from the expulsion of from Rome. So the Reform Orthodox Conservative was a European phenomenon based on Christianity, as a response to Christianity, and living in European Christian society. And there's many different levels of what the different schools meant. In Israel today, since the reformation of Israel, there's basically just Orthodox and secular. So the major schools in Israel are either intra-Orthodox schools that all accept the prophecies of Moses and the Bible being true, and Israel is the fulfillment of biblical prophecy, as opposed to in Europe before the war, the Reform and Conservative were somewhat rejections of biblical prophecy. So like, I'm a Jew, this is my heritage. Being a Jew meant that I descended from the Middle East. My ancestors came from Israel, and after the Roman expulsion and the travels of history ended up in Europe and preserved the teachings to do.
This is what we call the diaspora, right?
Yeah, the diaspora, and still in this area till today. That's. But you note that Reform and Conservative don't really exist in modern Israel, and they don't really exist in global Judaism, because Judaism permeates all cultures. You'll find Judaism in Arab societies and all over the world. The Reform and Conservative is a reaction to Christian Europe and living in a Christian society.
So the ultimate goal, though, what is so as far as I can understand it when you were talking about it earlier, there is a school that says just by following the laws of Moses, this is the way we become saved, redeemed, and then there's a whole other mystical branch that we're talking about.
So in Europe, you had maybe called the Litvish, the generic Orthodox, that held the Mosaic law. But they really give too many reasons. This is what we do. You must do it. God will punish us if we don't do it. We believe that Messiah will come. It's in the prayers. Eventually we'll be redeemed. The temple will be rebuilt. But that's not what we're about. We're about living the law, following the law, doing the ritual properly, irregardless of the outcome. And the more mystical schools, Hasidic, Kabbalistic schools, were more in detail. Why are we doing it? What's the outcome? When will redemption occur? What's the redemption about? What's the redemption going to look like? What's the connection between doing the daily rituals and the ultimate redemption? And there were large debates in Europe, much history to it, infighting, snitching each other to the authorities. The Hasidim classically, like the Hare Krishna a little bit, were dancing and chanting in the street, and
the Hasidim,
and very into the prayer. Redemption could come at any time, preparing for redemption, and a direct connection. Like there's a reason why we're doing it. Good things are going to happen to us because we do it, and a more trying to understand that purpose. As the more hard old school was like, this is what you do. It doesn't matter whether the outcome is good or bad. You still got to do it.
Wow. Well, this has been a fascinating whole history.
Enlightening.
Yeah.
Yes.
Now, in your own life, you've brought in other spiritual practices than the traditional Jewish. You've looked beyond that.
I came back to the Detroit area. I lived in Orthodox culture. It was basically fully Orthodox to the best of my ability for over 10 years in Israel and New York. But I came back here. My family's not particularly Orthodox. I ended up looking into Vedic religions, specifically ISKCON, Hare Krishna, Prabhupada, which rounded things off, actually created a better understanding sometimes for the ultra-Orthodox, comparing to India, maybe a rejection of technology and industrialization, seeing from a different lens spiritual practices. Because like Kabbalah is basically karma yoga. It's an explanation for how the spiritual is manifest in the material, which is, according to strict orthodoxy, that doesn't really matter. And whether it is or isn't, this is what we got to do. These are the prayers we got to say. These are rituals we have to follow. Whether the spiritual part of it is true or not. Or
Wow.
so the Vedic teachings sat very well. They're very interesting. It, enlightened my mind, and I always
Put
had
it all together.
Yeah.
I always
Yeah.
had an interest in it. It
Yeah.
kind of, I'm just a person, just came upon these teachings. The merit to decide to go to Israel after high school, interest to learn these things. So the same
Yeah.
way Judaism came to me, so did the Vedic wisdom.
Fantastic.
Just kind of came to me like, this is great, powerful wisdom.
The next step. Yeah.
You're a searcher.
Yeah, we've
Thank you.
run
Thank
out
you
of
so
time. I
much,
can't
David.
believe it. It
Thank
was
you
so
for joining us.
interesting. Thank you so much.
Thank you for
Maybe
having
you
me.
can take us out with a Hebraic psalm as we speak.
Mentioned Psalm 23. Mizmor LeDavid, Adonai Roi Lo Yexar. The Lord's my shepherd, I shall have no fear. I remember chanting this countless times. I could think of tens of different tunes to it.
Beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
And thank all of you for joining us on Out of the Ordinary into the Extraordinary. Don't forget,
God is alive and magic is afoot.